Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong. Now, this is a 7-issue limited comic book series written by Brian Buccellato, illustrated by Christian Duce, and published by DC and Legendary Comics between 2023 and 2024. And this is obviously a collected edition that collects all 7 issues as one graphic novel. Now, this crosses over the DC universe with the Monsterverse, which is the current American series of Godzilla films from Legendary Pictures. Of course, based on the Japanese film franchise, which started with the 1954 sci-fi horror classic Godzilla, also known as Gojira from Ishiro Honda. The Monsterverse also features King Kong, who first appeared in the 1933 classic from Marion C. Cooper and Ernest B. Shusek. So, obviously, the original Godzilla and the original King Kong are both classic movies on their own, but they both spawn their own franchises that recently have been crossed over with the Monsterverse. Now, the Monsterverse includes the 2014 Godzilla, Kong Skull Island, 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla vs. Kong, and Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, as well as the Apple TV series Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. Now, it should be noted that the recent Japanese Godzilla films like Shin Godzilla and Godzilla -1 are completely unconnected to the Monsterverse. Now, I've already reviewed all the King Kong and Godzilla movies in the past, but I'm specifically doing this review as part of my yearly series of Superman reviews. Now, it should be noted, this is not the first time Godzilla's crossed over with well-known superheroes. In the 70s, Marvel briefly got the rights to Godzilla from Toho, and they did their own series of Godzilla comics, which were actually set in the Marvel Universe, and in that series you actually had Godzilla fighting the Fantastic Four and the Avengers. Now, granted, that was a different version of Godzilla, but it is kind of funny to think that technically Godzilla has invaded both the Marvel and DC universes. Now, of course, whether you want to consider these kinds of crossovers to be canon is totally up to you. Personally, I look at these kinds of crossovers as being more like what-if stories. But at least in the case of this one, they do try to use the whole multiverse explanation to explain how the two universes could be connected. So, the plot of this comic is Lex Luthor and the rest of the Legion of Doom, in a bid to finally rid themselves of Superman and the Justice League, break into the Fortress of Solitude, and their plan is to steal the technology that could open the gateway to the Phantom Zone, and their plan is to trap the Justice League in the Phantom Zone for all eternity. But something goes wrong, and they're accidentally transported to an alternate reality, a parallel Earth. Now, on this alternate version of Earth, there are no superheroes or metahumans, but there are giant monsters. It turns out this is the universe that the Monsterverse movies take place in, or at least a universe where similar events have happened. Now, during all this, the villain Toyman got his hands on a magical dreamstone that could basically make your dreams become reality, and with the dreamstone, he wishes that all these monsters will come back with him to his home universe. So, basically, the Legion of Doom are then transported back to their home world, but along with them are all these monsters like King Kong, Godzilla, the Skullcrawlers, and other monsters from the Monsterverse. So now Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, and the rest of the Justice League have to take on this strange new threat. So yeah, Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong is an insanely fun read. If you're a DC fan, or if you're a Godzilla fan, or a King Kong fan, or simply a fan of the Monsterverse movies, I would recommend checking this out. Just don't be expecting anything deep or thought-provoking. This is just a romp. and it's meant to be read as nothing more or less than that. Now, I despise the term turn your brain off, but if you don't have a stick up your ass, again, it's an enjoyable read. And it's surprisingly pretty well thought out in terms of bringing these two universes together. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's convoluted as shit, but I at least appreciate that there was some effort put into it, and you could tell there was some thought put into actually making it make sense that these two things could come together like this. Like, it's not like the Batman or Superman crossovers with the Alien or Predator franchises, which, don't get me wrong, I love those, but with those, you're just kind of left to assume that the Predators and the Xenomorphs just randomly exist in the DC universe. This at least tries to explain how all of a sudden King Kong and Godzilla are in the DC universe. And they do some pretty fun things with this, like, when Supergirl first meets King Kong, you could tell Kong is starting to have kind of a thing for her, and of course, Supergirl is having none of that shit, which is an obvious reference to Fay Ray and how King Kong always seems to kidnap blonde women. At one point, you see Gorilla Grodd in this comic, who is a villain of the Justice League. He's the leader of a race of intelligent apes, and when he sees Kong, he literally thinks Kong is God. There's also a giant bat creature from the Monsterverse who, interestingly, I don't think has ever appeared in any of the Monsterverse movies or on Monarch Legacy of Monsters. I think he's only appeared in the novelization of Godzilla King of the Monsters, as well as some of the other Monsterverse comics. But this bat creature, of course, invades Gotham City. At one point, Godzilla attacks Atlantis, and Aquaman releases the Kraken. So I thought that was cool, like having these monsters go up against giant monsters that we already know exist in the DC universe. Lex Luthor ends up taking control of Mechagodzilla, and the Green Lanterns actually give a Green Lantern power ring to King Kong. So King Kong literally becomes a Green Lantern at one point. I mean, it's so stupid, but why the fuck not? At one point, Batman builds a giant bat mecha to take on Mechagodzilla. Like, it really almost feels like a 10-year-old wrote this, but I mean that in a good way. It fits for the tone of story that this is. Of course, there is a fight between Superman and Godzilla towards the beginning of the comic, and Godzilla basically wipes the floor with Superman. Another thing I appreciated, so in the story, Toyman, like I said, he wishes all the monsters into the DC universe with this magical Dreamstone, and I'm pretty sure that's the same Dreamstone that Morpheus used in the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman, which does connect to the DC universe. I appreciated that because I am a fan of that series. By the way, I am aware of the elephant in the room involving Neil Gaiman right now. I know he's had some allegations leveled against him, but separating the art from the artist, I still am a fan of that series, leaving aside what Gaiman may or may not have done. Although it does kind of make me wish that some of DC's more supernatural superheroes, like John Constantine, or Dr. Fate, or Edric the Demon, or Swamp Thing, or even one of the Endless would have shown up in this. I think that would have been really cool, and especially really cool to see how one of those superheroes would have taken on a kaiju. So, apparently there is a sequel in the works from the same creative team, and apparently it is going to have King Ghidorah, Mothra, and Rodan, so I'm pretty excited to see what they do with that. Something I do think would be cool, and I know Legendary does not have the rights to Biollante, but I actually think a fight between Swamp Thing and Biollante would be really interesting, or even Poison Ivy coming across Biollante. Like, how would Poison Ivy react to Biollante? Like, would she view Biollante as sort of a godlike being? But again, Biollante is not part of the Monsterverse, and DC certainly doesn't have the rights to this character. I just think that would be a very interesting dynamic. So yeah, that was my review of Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong, and this concludes 2025's series of Superman reviews, which, yeah, I know I only did 3 Superman reviews this year, but now I'm gonna go on to my Batman reviews for this year, so my next book review will be on Batman the Cult by Jim Starlin.